Zimri and the other elders of Judah called the heads of the families together. Moses called for 12 spies to enter Canaan, one from each tribe. Judah must choose a representative. Dozens of men volunteered, Caleb among them. Though he quaked at the thought of entering Canaan without the Lord overhead, he knew if he was chosen, he and his family would hold a place of honor from this time forward. Let me, I'm not afraid, send me. Everyone started talking at once, and no one heard him but those standing close by. They sneered. The elders were calling for discussion. It should be a young man without wife and children on such a journey. There's no guarantee this man will return alive. There are giants in the land, descendants of Anak. At that, some men changed their minds about volunteering. Voices grew louder. Let each family offer one, and we will cast lots to see who the Lord will send. If that happened, Caleb knew he stood no chance. He shoved into the circle. I will go. His sons would have a place among God's people, even if he had to sacrifice his life to make certain of it. The gathering fell silent. Several looked to Zimri. The old man shook his head. No. Caleb faced the old man he had saved. Why not? He looked around the circle. I don't see all that many jumping at the chance to go. You have 2 wives and sons. Not to mention the rabble who came with him, another called out from the back. Caleb seethed, but forced himself to offer a wry smile. Why not send the dog if he's so eager to sniff out Canaan? Some laughed at Caleb's challenge. Others called out in agreement. What do you say? Will you send the Caleb? A cry of agreement rose amidst the laughter. Caleb laughed loudest, determined. Mock me if you will, but send me. If I die in Canaan, what have you lost? Nothing. Enough, Zimri shouted. Hear me. The men grew quiet. Moses has called for men who are leaders. He's no leader who mocks his brother. Caleb felt the heat surge in his face and then realized Zimri's scowl was directed at the man who had started the baiting. The offender lowered his gaze. Zimri looked to the others. Who will represent Judah on this perilous errand? Step forward if you're willing. Otherwise, be silent. Emboldened by Zimri's defense, Caleb stepped up into the center of the circle. Send me. You're not equipped. Did I not go into battle beside Joshua against the Amalekites? You are my friend, Caleb, but you are not full-blooded. Another man finished with what Zimri was too kind to voice. Caleb's face flushed as he looked between the elders. Did I not hear you just call me brother? We have an alliance with you, but it must be a Judean by birth that should go on our behalf. That these words should come from Zimri hurt deeply, for he had thought him an ally. And where is he? Caleb swept his hand toward the standing silent. Zimri frowned. You are not a young man, Caleb. I'm 40 years old, and I come with 40 years of life experience. He turned his back on Zimri and walked the circle, pausing to look into the face of each man he passed. Do you want to go? Do you? Come on, step forward if you're willing to face the Anak. No one held his gaze for long. The man who goes into Canaan will not just be looking at the enemy we must fight, at their city walls and weapons, but at the land itself. Should Judah not have the best? All of you were but brickmakers and shepherds. I was a farmer. I made my living off the land. To have good crops, you need good land. I offer myself as your servant. Send me. Everyone started talking once again. Let God decide, someone called out, and others joined in. Zimri and the elders commanded order again and called for a lottery. One man from each family must bring a lot. We will let the Lord decide. And there was an end of further discussion. Grim and despairing, Caleb had his name edged upon a bone and placed and tossed into the growing pile. The census had counted 74,600 men 20 years and older in the tribe of Judah. There would be thousands of lots cast before the choice was known. And lots were shaken and cast. And lots were shaken and cast before the choice was known. And lots were shaken and cast, and the elimination process began. It would take the rest of the night, if longer. Ephrath tried to soothe him, but Caleb went off by himself and sat looking up at the pillar of fire swirling next to the sky. He spread his hands, palms up. He had no words to express his longing. I'm as afraid as any man to go into Canaan and walk among the giants who live there. But I fear more not being counted among your people. Do not allow them to set me aside. Please don't reject me, Lord. Purify my blood. Make me a son of Israel. He covered his head. I know I'm not fully Hebrew, Lord. I know Esau's blood runs in my veins, but even so, Lord. He lifted up his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. You're my God. You and only you. There is no other. He knew there were many who disliked him, who thought he was proud and ambitious, a thorn in their sides. Some wished he would turn around and go back to Egypt. They saw him as a growling, groveling dog at the edge of camp. And didn't he behave like one, barking constantly for what he wanted? A place among God's people. He groaned. Who was he to think himself worthy to represent the tribe of Judah? Surely the Lord looked down and saw him for the cur he was. He hunched against the rock, too depressed to go back to camp. Dawn came and went. It was midday before he returned to his tent. Zimri was there in the shady entrance of Caleb's tent, sipping the drink Ephrath had just replenished. Caleb sat with him. I'm sorry I put you in an awkward position, Zimri. I had no right to demand that I be chosen to represent Judah. I'm not worthy. The old man opened his hand. Caleb's lot lay on his palm. He took the lot and turned it over and over in his hand. You removed it from the pile? I did. Caleb felt as though he'd been kicked in the gut. It was a moment before he could speak. I thought being counted in the census at least gave me the right to take part in the lottery. You misunderstand me, Caleb. So it would seem. Caleb looked out at the other tents clustered close. He did not want Zimri to see his deep hurt. Angry words rose, but he held them back. Rash speaking would cause a permanent rift between them, and Caleb had few friends among the sons of Judah as it was. Who won the lottery? You're the only man I know who would see it as winning. Caleb gave a bleak laugh. Who is God sending? Who do you think? The old man stared at him. After a moment, he smiled faintly. It would seem among all the men of Judah, God has chosen you to represent us. Caleb felt goose flesh rise up and down his back and arms. First joy, then terror filled him. He released his breath unevenly. Zimri laughed. Wonders never cease, my friend. This is the first time I've seen you speechless. He rose. Report to Moses, and he will give you further instructions. Whatever you need, Caleb. Anything. You only have to ask. The men of Judah will give it. When Caleb saw Joshua among the other spies, he pressed his way through the men gathered. Ah, my young friend, Caleb grinned. Let an old man travel with you. Between us, we'll have the impetuousness of youth and the cunning of age on our side. Joshua laughed. I wondered if Judah would send you. They clasped hands. God sent me. I would meet your friend, Joshua. Caleb would know that his voice, if it had spoken to him, Caleb would know that voice if it had spoken to him in the darkness. Heart hammering, he turned and bowed his head low to Moses. He had never been this close to God's chosen prophet. Aaron, dressed in garments of the high priest, stood behind his brother, forgiven and restored by God. Do not bow low before me, Moses put his hand upon Caleb. I'm but a man. Caleb straightened. A man, yes, but God's anointed prophet who speaks the words of the Lord. You have pleaded for our lives when we deserved death, and God granted us mercy. May the Lord grant you long life and teach us obedience. Joshua grasped his shoulder. This is Caleb of the tribe of Judah. Ah, yes, I saw you fight alongside Joshua against the Amalekites. Stunned that he had been noticed, Caleb received the blessing. Moses gathered the men. The Lord told me to send out from the people men to explore the land of Canaan, which he was going to give to us. Go northward through the Negev into the hill country. See what the land is like and find out whether the people living there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? Do their towns have walls or are they unprotected? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there many trees? Enter the land boldly and bring back samples of the crops you see. After praying for them and blessing them, Moses and Aaron left them alone to make their plans for departure. The men agreed to meet at dawn and leave together. Caleb, with ideas of his own, returned to his tent to make preparations. When he arrived at the agreed meeting site the next morning, the others stared and spoke in derision. "You look like an Egyptian trader." Caleb grinned. "Good." Dressed in finery, he held the lead rope of 3 donkeys laden with trade goods donated by the men of Judah, and another with a saddle but no rider. This was the best way to get inside the walled cities and take a good look around. "Inside the walls? Are you out of your mind? We can see all we need to see from the outside." It was too early to argue. "You go your way, we'll go ours." He tossed the reins to Joshua, then tapped the flank of his mount with a stick and set off. Once again, from Kadesh and the multitude and camped the first night. Once away from the multitude, they camped the first night on the road in the wilderness of Paran. He would be able to speak with these men. Perhaps then they would listen. The others came along behind, mumbling. Joshua rode alongside him. "What do you have in mind?" He did not look comfortable mounted. Caleb swung his leg off the donkey. Joshua dismounted and they walked together. "Here is how I see it, Joshua. We need to find out everything we can about Canaanite defenses, and you can't do that by skirting around the city. You have to go inside and see what war machines they have, if any, how strong their walls are, where their weak points exist. How does a farmer come to know anything about warfare? I don't know much, my friend, but I've learned to observe everything around me. We must listen to the wind and watch the movement of the stars and the passing seasons. I think there may be more than one reason for each command the Lord gives us." Joshua tilted his head. "Go on." "We know God fights for us. He destroyed Egypt with the plagues and opened the sea to give us safe passage out of Egypt. We know he's promised to give us Canaan, but we continue to test him. It seems part of our nature is to rebel against the Lord. Who knows what tomorrow may bring, Joshua? But there may be more than one reason why God sends us to view the land and people." Caleb smiled bleakly. "If we fail again, what will God have us do? Or what would God do to them? We won't fail." "I have faith in God, my friend, but little faith in men." They camped on the desolate southern edge of the wilderness of Zin. When they reached the dry mountain terrain of the Negev, Caleb thought it was wise to split into smaller groups. "We're safer together. 2 men can move more quickly than 12, and 6 groups will see more of Canaan than 1. "There is that to consider." Joshua's face shone bronze in the firelight. "And another. If we come as one, we will draw attention to ourselves, and the Canaanites may view us as a threat. If we travel in pairs, we can melt in and mingle. Take note of everything you see. Join others traveling and listen. We'll meet here and make the journey back together." Caleb had another idea. "Wherever you go, speak of what happened in Egypt. Spread the news that the Lord God of Israel overcame the gods of Egypt and delivered the Hebrews from slavery." The others spoke in protest. "We may be questioned by leaders if we do that. The less we talk about what God did in Egypt, the safer for us." Even Joshua looked troubled by Caleb's suggestion. Caleb tried to reason with them. "God called for leaders from among the tribe of Israel, men of courage. You're really younger than me. But where is your fire of youth? Didn't you hear what Moses said? The Lord has given us the land already. Canaan's already ours. We're being sent merely to see and report to the people the great gift God has given us. Do you really think we'll just stroll into Canaan and the inhabitants will flee before us? If they know the God who is with us, yes. With the Lord at our side, who will dare come against us? Let the Canaanites know what has befallen Egypt, so that the fear of the Lord will fall upon them. Then they will run from us when Moses leads us into Canaan." Shaphat of Simeon stood. "A bold plan, Caleb." Shammua of Reuben shook his head. "A little too bold, in my opinion." "Should we not be bold? Look to the Lord who look things over," Paladi of Benjamin said. "That's what Moses said. That's all he said." They ignored him. Nabi of Naphtali gave a grim laugh. "That's all I plan to do." "What good if we get ourselves killed?" Emiel of Dan wanted to know. Joshua looked across the fire at Caleb. Caleb gave him a hard stare. "Why do you say nothing? You have stood beside Moses, you who have seen closer at hand than any of us the power of the Lord." The others talked on around them. "No one has to die if we keep out of the cities and stay off the roads." "Stay low and listen," Caleb said in disgust. "Be like a lizard in the dust." Shaphat's eyes flashed. You are not our leader, Caleb. We will do what is best in our own eyes. Igal of Issachar, Gadi of Manasseh, and Asher of Sheher agreed. You don't have to say much to plant fear in the minds of men, do you? Caleb looked around at the gathering, jaw clenched. We were not sent to be foolhardy. You're going to get yourself and anyone who travels with you killed. Caleb glared at Joshua. He looked up at the heavens. These are the leaders of Israel? He rose abruptly, unable to stomach anymore, and went out into the night. He wanted to shout out his frustration at their timidity, but instead sat alone, thinking about God. He missed the swirling cloud of protection, the word of God given through Moses. Even now that he had been chosen by God to stand among these men, Caleb felt like an outsider. He had nothing in common with them. Didn't he? God's chosen, cowards everyone. He didn't understand Joshua's reticence. The young man had fought valiantly against the Amalekites. He was no coward. So why did he sit in silence, watching and listening? Not an idea in his head. Am I wrong, Lord? Should we creep along, peering over rocks from behind trees? Should we tiptoe through the land? Should we go back and to the fire and give them into their plans? I can't do that. I can't. If I sit with them and take their counsel, I will give in to fear. I will cower before the Canaanites as I did before the Egyptian. Who then will be the master of my life but fear itself? Lord, you alone are to be feared. You're the one who holds our lives in your hands. Joshua joined him. We leave at first light. He looked up, scanning the sky. They will go in three groups and one alone. You and I will travel together. Did you decide that all by yourself, Joshua? Caleb gave a cold laugh as he stood and faced him. Or did the others decide for you? Did you all cast lots around the fire? I needed to hear everyone's plan and then lay them out before the Lord to seek his guidance. Temper snuffed by Joshua's words. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. Forgive me, brother. He gave a self-deprecating laugh. No wonder God chose you to stand by Moses' side. I have much to learn, Caleb, but the Lord has said, do not be afraid. Caleb turned the younger man back toward the light. Then we will not be afraid. We will cast our fear of men, and fear only the Lord who holds our lives in his mighty hand. The rugged mountains and wadis of the Negev made travel difficult. Two of the groups decided they would head for the foothills to the west, traveling in the forests below the ridge country. Caleb was relieved they were finally willing to venture out. Caleb and Joshua moved further north until they encountered towns of stone built on hilltops. They spent the night outside the walls of Kirjath-sepher, paid tariffs so they could trade, and set out wares in the marketplace the next day. Caleb fought his fears as he watched the Hittite men. They stood a head taller than he and were heavier muscled, armed and richly dressed, from cone helmets to thick braided hair and trimmed beards to their finely woven, colorfully patterned garments and leather-covered feet. They walked with an air of power and confidence. The women, too, were comely and bold. You do not speak as we do, a woman looked him over. Where are you from? He noticed her interest in a gold and lapis bracelet and picked it up. Egypt, a ruined country. He held his bracelet out and named his price. Grain, olive oil. Others milled around the jewelry, bargaining. Will apricots do or almonds? Caleb agreed to a measure of both. The first woman returned quickly with the necessary staples. Her eyes glowed as she slipped the bracelet on. I got the better bargain, she laughed. Grain we have aplenty. Olive oil, but nothing as grand as this. She caressed the gold and lapis. What did you mean when you said Egypt is ruined? The plagues. What plagues? Another heard the dreaded word. The god of the Hebrews made war against the god of Pharaoh. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs and flies swarmed over the country. Locusts came and ate the crops. Fire from heaven burned what remained. Pestilence killed the cattle, sheep, goats, camels. Even as we began starving, an outbreak of boils struck everyone, even the house of Pharaoh. And then the worst came to pass. Have you ever had a boil? No. Such pain and misery you can't imagine. And the scars, horrible scars. The woman's eyes went wide with alarm. You said that wasn't the worst. What could be worse than beauty destroyed? Tell us, another came close by. What did you mean by the worst? How could it be worse than what you've described? The Lord God of Israel struck down every firstborn male from Pharaoh's house to the lowest servant, even among the animals. Do you hear what this man says? The woman called for the others to listen. A crowd of men and women gathered. How did you survive? We escaped death by the skin of our teeth, Caleb noted the weapon the man wore. May I have a look at that sword? Why? You have swords in Egypt. I have never seen anything so grand. Proud, the man drew it, taunting Caleb for a moment before offering a closer look. Caleb took it carefully. Such an honor, he flattered the owner as he studied the shape of the blade, tested the weight and balance, while the man laughed among his friends. Caleb handed the sword to Joshua, who studied it as well, and handed it back to the Hittite. Perhaps it is a good time to expand our territories, the man said as he slipped the sword into its scabbard. We will tell our king of Egypt's weakened state. Caleb and Joshua took turns walking around the town and then packing up the remaining wares and moving on. They have more gods than Egypt. Baser ones, Caleb couldn't hide his disgust. Here I am, a stranger to their city, and one of their women invites me to please Astar by lying with her? At least it was not Anath calling for your blood. Those people bow down to gods who consume children in fires and call for men and women to fornicate upon their altars. Did you notice how little surprised those women were when you told them about the 10th plague of the death of the firstborn? Some in Canaan cast their firstborn sons into the fire to appease Molech. They traveled on to Kiriath Arba, a city inhabited by the sons of Anak, a descendant of giants. The land was good, the city walled and fortified. Altars stood in every corner, the largest in the middle of town. Caleb saw crowds gather to watch a man and woman writhe upon the altar, crying out for Baal to awaken and bring fertility to their land. Lust swept like fire among them. The more Caleb saw of these people, the more he despised them for their debauchery and wickedness. There was no limit to the grotesque worship they performed for their gods, even to burning their own children. He and Joshua traveled to a Jebusite city on the mountaintops and then on to Ai and Shechem until they reached Rahab in the far north. Turning south once again, they made their way down the mountains and traveled along a great rift in the river Jordan. Jericho loomed before them. They followed the trade road into the mountains again, meeting the others at the prearranged point near Kiriath Arba. There they agreed that the land was everything God had promised, a land flowing of milk with its flocks and herds and honey among the fruit trees and wheat fields and olive groves and vineyards. They had all tasted of it. When they came through the valley, Caleb and Joshua cut a single cluster of grapes so large they had to carry it on a pole between them. Go get some of those pomegranates, Joshua called out to the others. And some figs, Caleb shouted. He laughed. The people will never believe the abundance until they see it with their own eyes. Even what we bring back will not tell them of the riches of the land God promised us. 40 days had passed, and Caleb couldn't wait to get back to Kadesh. As soon as the people heard and saw proof of everything God had said being true, the sooner they would come back. God would help them drive out the evil inhabitants so the 12 tribes could reclaim the land Jacob and Caleb's ancestors had left 400 years ago. Not once did it occur to Caleb the people might not listen. And that's the end of part 2.